What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Apartment 113 podcast, where we talk with cool folks in the cannabis and psychedelics industry to learn about their projects and celebrate their successes. My name is Rob Sanchez, and this is episode 19. We're joined today by Sean Yoder. Sean is the founder of Aldertine Cannabis CFOs. Aldertine provides fractional CFO and CPA services for the cannabis industry. Sean has a long history with the legacy cannabis market in Northern California, acting as an accountant and financial advisor. He has a few different other projects going on, including being a member of the DOPE CFO community of nationally recognized cannabis and CBD accounting and tax professionals. Learn more at aldertinegroup.com. That's ALDERTINE group.com. And enjoy the show. Sean, welcome to the show, man.
Nice to be here, Rob. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, always good to have an accountant on the show and dig into the numbers side of the industry. I think it's the most important part, but sometimes kind of an afterthought too for operators.
Yeah, I think for most people it's like, oh, the boring part, but it definitely determines whether you're going to be successful or not.
Yeah, it's all coming down to those quarterly reports, the cost of goods and things like that kind of standard and maybe normal to manufacturing industries, but definitely unique or still being learned about on the cannabis side.
Absolutely. And, I've worked in farming for many years, not just cannabis, and it is determining costs of a pound of anything is very challenging. And a lot of farmers, and I don't want to just single out cannabis farmers, even though they tend to get looked at, kind of funny. Most farmers, even if they're growing chickens or almonds, they struggle with their cost per pound. It's very challenging in the ag business.
Oh, so it's not necessarily an issue with cannabis. It's more just cost accounting in general is not an easy thing to embark on.
It is, and it's hard to it's not necessarily always intuitive because you're adding so many different types of things into how you generate that cost per pound. So it's just something that I've gotten used to working with, and I think the most important thing here is for a lot of people to remember is at the end of the day, especially if you're a cultivator, that cannabis is still agriculture. A lot of people say that it isn't, but at the end of the day, you're farming.
Very much so. Yeah, it's there's no way around that, right? You need to track your inputs, prepare your soil medium, keep the rooms clean or keep your field trimmed and ready to go. It's an industry maybe that people get a little excited for, and we'll dig into that, man. But let's talk a little bit about your journey to cannabis as an accountant. Kind of which industries did you get started in, or how did you find yourself in this pivotal role for businesses, helping them with their finances for the industry?
Yeah, my background in the cannabis industry goes back to being a teenager. So I've been around the cannabis game for a long, long time. Growing up in Northern California, it's been a big part of my life. It's a big part of community life here, and so it was always something that I was interested in. And my parents were very concerned about that, and so my mom intervened when I was about 16 and said, "You've got to get a trade, son." My parents were entrepreneurs. They owned their own business, and so they essentially taught me accounting for their business. And from there, they sort of gave me a pathway in life. And so I've done a lot of different kinds of accounting over the years. But what it really came down to is that when I was working in agriculture, that was kind of when the light bulb went on. It's like, well, aren't people just growing cannabis too? Couldn't I do this? And that was where I started sort of researching and going, oh, I really want to serve. I want to serve the community that is around me that I'm very close to and very passionate about. And that was when I found out about 280E, which is, the IRS tax code, which really makes this industry extremely difficult. And it's a really, really simple thing that it says, no deductions, no credits. And so that means that everything falls on your cost of goods sold. That's all you get. So you're essentially looking at businesses. The normal tax rate is anywhere between 20 and 30%. You're looking at businesses at anywhere between 70 and 90% tax rate. So accounting is absolutely essential if you're going to make it in this industry. And so that was when I was like, this is the niche for me. They need me.
Right. Yeah, man. And achieving profit still with a 70 to 90% tax is almost impossible without excellent bookkeeping and taking advantage of those tax codes that operators can, like 471. Is that how the cost of goods can help to offset some of that tax weight?
That's exactly it. 471.11 is specifically that subsection of inventories at cost, which is what that whole 471 section is all about. But that one is specifically for farmers, and I knew about that for years working with chicken farmers, that we were using 471.11 to figure out what the overhead costs are, because it's more than just your direct labor. It's more than just your direct inputs. It's things like lighting, water, rent, if you're paying rent, or if you have a mortgage, figuring out all of those different additional costs, which will determine your cost per pound, how profitable you are, but it will also lower your tax bill. And what I've normally seen, Rob, is everybody always says, oh, there's a lot of negative news about this industry that, oh, people are gaming the system to pay less taxes. But in my experience, that most people are afraid of tangling with the IRS, so they're overpaying in their taxes. So you already have a business that's struggling to be profitable, and because you're afraid of getting nabbed in an audit that that you're going to end up having to pay some sort of high tax bill, you're going ahead and giving them that money up front, which may or may not be rightfully belong to the IRS. So that's very concerning to me.
Wow, yeah. So they're actually taking it in the opposite direction and being overly cautious, right? Trying to avoid those pitfalls and knowing that their business is going to be high on getting that red flag or getting that audit selection. So yeah. 471 was not created for cannabis. It was around in agriculture before. Were there other codes or other laws that I guess were giving agricultural businesses trouble that 471 was created to improve?
Yeah, 471, for any business that had an inventory at all, 471 exists. So if you're a manufacturer, you're using 471, or if you're a retailer, you're using it. When 280E came along, it was really to nab drug dealers. It was to add enhanced penalties that, was essentially basically saying not only are we going to get you on the criminal side, but we're also going to get you on the tax side too, that you're going to get a hefty tax bill. And that really honestly came out of the cocaine trade, but it's going to apply to any Schedule 1 drug. And then when California and other states started to legalize, you got your California, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, all of those states began to legalize. At that point, Congress had to say, well, we have to do something because this is now a legitimate business at the state level. And so basically at that point, they said that you could use 471 like any other inventory business. And then it became the only way that you could actually lower your tax bill, because you're not going to get your standard costs that lower your tax bill. If you donate to charity, you're not getting if you do marketing and advertising, which is why you see so many companies that have so many sub-entities. Like you'll see a lot of companies that will split off and they'll have a media company and they'll have a company that has all the property holdings and things like that. Those are all ways to get those to lower the tax bill. So there's a lot of different strategies and there's a lot of different interpretations of how to work with 280E, from very aggressive to ignoring it. I definitely see some people choosing to ignore it altogether at their own peril.
That's a hard angle to take.
Yeah, it is.
So 471.11 doesn't completely offset 280E, even with 100% accurate tracking and bookkeeping. You're still going to have that elevated tax rate as a cannabis business, but it does take a bulk of that weight away. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is. If you're doing it correctly, what I've seen is that people are actually able to, small privately held businesses are actually able to run profitably. And that's always that's the big winning moment as an accountant, when you come into a situation where there's chaos and people are struggling to be profitable or don't have a clear picture, and then you help them to do their accounting correctly, and then they see their first tax bill and they're like, all the money that I spent on you was we just saved that on taxes. So you've definitely paid for yourself. And then, then they can see that path to profitability. And that's a huge relief in this industry with everybody struggling the way they are.
Yes, yes, indeed. And is that really the kind of some of the that ambition or some of the passion then that led to Aldertine Group and the cannabis CFOs that you're a part of now?
Yeah, definitely. The idea was is that when I was just helping my neighbors determine their cost per pound and help them to file their tax returns, that was one thing, which was, it definitely lit a fire under me in terms of how I wanted to do this. But then I saw this industry is desperately in need of professionals to do this work. And that was really where I needed to do something, and that's when I founded my company, and basically that's what we do. And I primarily focused in California, but I do work in other states. I'm definitely making inroads in Oregon and also in South Dakota, of all places. So, and I'll be honest with you, California being so big is its own set of challenges in doing business, no matter what. California always brings its own set of problems and challenges. But when you work in a smaller population state like Oregon or especially South Dakota, which is an extremely low population state, a lot more business just gets done on, I know somebody down the street that can do that. And I love that the fact that things can get done more and like, let me go knock on somebody's door, kind of that more intimate sort of environment. And I really enjoy that.
Right. Yeah, getting out of the California market can be probably a good and a bad thing in that regard. Escaping from some of the litigation, perhaps embracing a different culture there as well. And it's still cannabis, right? The same problem exists across all those state lines, as every state seems to think that they've got it right or that they've learned the best from all of the past states. And I don't think we found that solution yet.
I don't think we're going to until we have federal legalization or at least rescheduling. Let's leave it at just rescheduling. I have very strong opinions that with rec now with Minnesota looks like they're going to be rec here. I mean, you can buy cannabis beverages all over right now in Minnesota, like at liquor stores. So to me, it's already legal there. But when you have half of the states in the country that have recreation, that cat's out of the bag as far as I'm concerned. I don't think there's going to be any sort of rescheduling for any sort of pharmaceutical or medical, or at this point, I think most adults at this point just want cannabis. That seems to be, and it seems to be, there are very few issues in America these days that aren't polarized. And cannabis seems to be one that just has a broad sort of like, it doesn't matter. Like where I live here in Red Bluff, it's a predominantly older community. When I go to the dispensary there, and I'm no young guy, and when I go there, the people there are 10 or 15 years older than me, and that is always to me, it's like this has such broad consensus in terms of this is what people actually want, which is exciting. I don't think that the market has even come anywhere near critical mass yet, but I think it's all going to be a huge problem as we're seeing New York having a terrible rollout, and we still have states
Yeah,
like
what has happened there? Off the rails in New York City.
you know
That's an example of red tape for
y-
sure.
it is. I think that anytime you have big population states, I think honestly they're going to have the same sorts of problems in Florida when they finally go rec. I just, big population states have their own set of problems. I think the only big population state that might be able to skirt around it because they have such a great medical program is Pennsylvania. So all eyes on Pennsylvania. But everybody else has just been
So they might be able to grandfather rec in kind of without blinking an eye or without misstepping too much, huh? I wonder if
absolutely.
that's why Missouri has been hitting it out of the park. So they've kind of seamlessly switched over from med to rec and has been breaking records. The cost per pound in the state's skyrocketing, so they did something right. Or
They did.
it's just that ingrained in the lifeblood and then in the daily or in the culture of the society, kind of as you're saying, even in these states that you wouldn't typically call out as cannabis friendly states, it's still widely used and widely purchased.
It is, that was I had I worked in the music industry, and I had the opportunity to go across country twice in the back of a van with a band. And the two things I learned in the 90s was one, that if you were in the independent sort of rock music scene, like you were funding your tours by selling cannabis. from town to town, especially in the college campus towns that you would roll into. That was how you were funding your tour. It wasn't because there were so many people at your shows that you were just raking it in. And the other thing that I learned is
That
that
was an added benefit, huh?
yeah, it was. And the things that I learned were places that I didn't think were. I knew that they weren't cannabis friendly, but I had no idea that people were so into it. Places like Nebraska, places like Missouri, places like Tennessee, Alabama, like they really were into cannabis in those states, and that was a big eye opener for me. Growing up in Northern California, I thought that was pretty much the cannabis culture was pretty much centered in the Emerald Triangle and nowhere else. And then I go across country. It's like, no, people are
It got
really
all
into
the
this.
media attention the most.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that was a big eye opener for
I
me.
feel Yeah, I feel like the like legacy farmers in Kansas and Missouri, they're probably thankful that more of the heat was thrown on the Emerald Triangle, as it let them keep on smooth operating there.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, the thing you have to remember is in the Midwest, especially, and I think that the Midwest is really going to dominate cultivation when we have a federally legal market. You have people that are extremely talented at growing literally anything. And so then
Generational
yes,
families in agriculture. Yeah.
exactly. Just like I live in the Central Valley here in California, and that's what people do here is that they grow things, whether it's rice or cannabis or anything else you can think of. And I think that those places where you have this long-standing farming tradition are places, and I'm not surprised that Missouri is doing so well, is because you have lots of farmers there. And I think that states like Kansas and Nebraska, when they finally come on board, you're going to see a tremendous amount of output from those states and a lot of money being made.
Yeah, and the home grow opportunities in those states are excellent. The soil, in the Midwest and things like that is unique. It's nutrient dense and in most areas. So I think a cultivar or some cannabis plants that were selected for that environment or that were trained in that environment could be wonderful and like really widely accessible there. In especially like Missouri, Iowa, that's some of that soil where there's growing corn and wheat and all this other stuff. I love to see cannabis alongside those staples.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I learned a lot about regenerative farming living here the northern part of the Central Valley because of the poor soil conditions here from years of abuse from cattle ranching. And so there's a lot of regenerative farming
Oh,
going on here. And one of the things that I discovered was from various farmers is that growing things like hemp and cannabis is really restorative to the soil. It helps to rebuild poor soil. So I think that in places that haven't been such great places to grow for a long time, that have favorable non-arid environments, I think that the what it can do for those particular places is going. We don't even know yet, and that's the wonderful thing is how are different
yeah.
cultivars going to
The
perform in
potential.
different places? What are the potentials? We don't even know yet, and it's exciting to be honest with you.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to seeing those industries continue to evolve. As we were making fun of every state trying to do it differently and kind of and failing in different ways, but there is some good in that. I mean, with every state trying to improve, right, and learning from the last one, and really all of the different communities in each state and kind of in each region are kind of watching each other and mirroring as the industry grows. Are there other industries that Alderton Group caters to, or is it exclusively cannabis at this point?
It's exclusively cannabis. I have another business that I do. I
Awesome.
work in healthcare, doing accounting for healthcare, which is one of the reasons why I ended up in cannabis. Like healthcare is a great way to make money. To be honest with you, that's not an industry that's going anywhere. In fact, it's a growth industry. So I have this sort of fallback that allows me to pursue passionately, a lot more passionately, if I was just trying to start up a business in cannabis. So I've definitely focused on that. Focusing specifically on cannabis and nothing else.
I see. Right. Yeah, and having those, or knowing the other industries that you can specialize in, having those fallbacks or side projects is always great. On the cannabis front, or at least in my past, building software, I've I've always walked that line and occasionally jumped into non-cannabis industry solutions and back into the cannabis side. It's good to be able to pivot that way. And, something that we're definitely trying to highlight with Apartment 113, showing that there are so many folks in the cannabis industry doing roles that are very far, in a sense, from cultivating, from truly putting the seed in the ground, but still, working day in, day out to make the industry happen.
It's still a small industry in the amount of people out there. It's, you get a pretty good lay of the land after a couple of years in the industry and who's out there, who the players are. But at the same time, the diversity of what people are doing in this industry to service this industry, to make sure that people are growing fire, that they're manufacturing products that are innovative and new. It takes a lot of people to do that. That's the thing that to me is so impressive when you go to something like MJ Biz in Vegas, to see how many people they are doing, how many wearing, how many different hats and different roles they are to make this engine go. It's really impressive to me that there are so many people out there who one thing I've discovered from the accounting profession, which is a very straight and conservative profession, that there is a stigma attached to it, and you have to kind of make that leap into the industry. And so when I look at it and see other what I would call suits out there in this industry, and people can say whatever they want about suits in this industry, but those people had to take a tremendous risk to be in this industry. Maybe not the same risk of going to jail, right, like a farmer.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they've had to, sometimes my clients are my non-cannabis clients are not exactly happy about me serving this industry. And I'll be honest, my mom had a lot of concerns about me serving this industry, and we've had a lot of talks about it. And I think I finally allayed her concerns basically by showing her, like, this is what my bank account looks like. And she's like, you go, son.
Yeah, we'll talk about the morals of that later. Yeah, no, it can definitely be hard to convince the family there. When I started cultivating in Denver in 2011, 2012, and it was I think, several hard conversations with different sides of the family on that at that time, because of the industry was really in the heyday still, with states still figuring out compliance, Colorado, California kind of online, that at this point it's grown on them all, I think, and they were all cool about it after those discussions. But growing up in Kansas, you can imagine there were some reservations.
Absolutely. But you had the courage to do it, and you stuck with it. I mean, it's been a long time for you now. At this point, your family has had to accept it as being that's what you do.
Yeah, it's definitely part of life now. Another question on the Aldertine group: where does the name stem from? Is there a story there?
It's actually Aldertine. But a lot of people.
Oh, I've pronounced it wrong probably 12 times since the beginning of the cast. Aldertine group.
I'm used to it at this point. It's kind of an unusual name. It's a unique name, and I'll tell you exactly where it came from. It has kind of a funny story. I was camping one time, and I found an alder leaf. This was out at the Lost Coast, which is the coastal part of the Emerald Triangle between Humboldt and Mendocino County. I've been going there for 20 plus years, same place, and the giant alder groves from a community that once existed there that's no longer. And I was looking at the alder leaf, and what I noticed was all of these tines coming off of it, off of a main stem. And I said, well, this is kind of like a cultivar here. And I thought about it. It's like when you look at cannabis and all the things that it can do, it's like a plant. But look at all of these things it can do. And I was like, they look like, tines on a fork. So I'm like, Aldertine. And I was kind of going for that sort of unique sort of name, how the pharmaceuticals always have unique names. Like that, and that was kind of what I was going for. Is one plant can do so many different things and change so many different people's lives, and so it's like there's all these different pathways coming off of one plant. And to me, that's fascinating. There are very few plants like that. Maybe corn, maybe rice, but and those are staple crops that you would expect. But I would say the only other plant that's close to that, which has been cultivated for a long, long time, is the opium poppy, because of the effects of pain relief as far as that goes. But cannabis, you can't use opium on a regular basis without becoming horribly addicted to it. And guess what? Cannabis is like opium light without all the addiction issues.
Yeah, that's definitely a good origin story, man. I can see the connection there, and without a doubt, yeah, those different times and those different kind of tranches and areas of the industry are slowly being defined as new ones are emerging where we didn't even expect to see them. It's a it's a good approach on that front, and when it comes to the branding and the naming, I think Aldertine is a great example of branding in the industry. As I'm personally tired of the green puns
Me
and
too.
smoke related
That
titles,
was
but
that was one of the things, to be honest with you, and I appreciate you saying that, mentioning that. Because I came out of this culture as a young kid. For me, it was like I am a stoner, but I don't necessarily need to advertise that because I think at this point, people who know me well enough are like, yeah, we know you're cool with the plant. I don't need to sell that I'm down with the culture. What I found is that I need to sell that I'm
yeah,
competent
yeah.
with your accounting. And I think most people are well aware that I'm down with the culture. It's like, are you good with my accounting? And so if I use one of those green puns, like you said, or a smoker term, people are just like, oh, just another dude out there from the culture that's trying to do accounting. Whereas I'm from the culture, but I'm also the serious professional too. And I was just, really. So I appreciate you talking about that because I really struggled with that.
Yeah, it's always hard to name to name anything, right? A project, a story, or a company, a business. But yeah, it's good to have that backing and kind of know what it represents when making those decisions moving forward. All that fun stuff in branding. I think brands are gaining a lot of traction in the cannabis industry, as we've seen that operators have a hard time at times distinguishing themselves. Oops. As much as some brands can, as they white label and use other manufacturers, or are able to increase their footprint faster than a micro license. When it comes to the accounting side for these brands, is it an easier game as they scale, or does that scale introduce more complexity as you'd expect? I didn't know if maybe it's once it's done on a small level, if the accounting side can actually exponentially grow without too much headache.
Once what's nice when you start small and you think about this stuff from day one, and this is something anybody who's going to listen to this who's thinking about starting a business in this space, is when you're still really small. Think about the scaling then, and really scalability is all about having your procedures in place. How do you do things? Make sure you have that stuff well documented. I really like to shoot videos. Basically, say this is how you do this. This is how you do this, so that anybody can go back and reference that. And if you think about that stuff early on while you're still developing the business, it becomes so easy to scale up because you're like, oh, we've already proven that we can do it at a small scale. We've documented those procedures. We can think about what it looks like if we do 10 times that, 20 times that. And it also makes it, one of the great things about cannabis is that once you know what a particular cultivar's yields are and and what your soil is going to yield, you can look pretty far down the road in your harvest. So if you have an indoor operation and you're looking at doing 4 or 5, short-term harvests in a year, which is, pretty ambitious, you can get a pretty good idea of how many pounds you're going to generate based off of what you're going to grow. And that is really helpful. And that all starts at the very beginning, by harvest one, harvest two, when you're still early on. If you're trying to figure that stuff out when you're in harvest 5 or 6, you're kind of missing the boat and you're going to have some challenges. So it's better,
So
from the
it's not
very get
exactly
go.
this. Right. Okay. So it's more the timing of when you get started with it rather than the size or the scale of the operation.
Yeah, absolutely. And
When you're
go ahead.
no, when you're coming into these businesses to help them as a CFO or help them with the financial side of things, I imagine you've seen maybe some very well organized books, but also maybe some that were absolutely chaotic. Is there some approaches that you take to start to kind of rein the business in, or maybe some areas that you turn towards first as a CFO for a cannabis business?
That's an excellent question. That's really getting into the nuts and bolts. I've seen everything that you can possibly imagine. I've seen books that the companies that I've worked with where I come in and go, wow, there's not much cleanup involved here. This is really well set up. It's always there's somebody on the team, an owner or a founder on the team. It's like accounting's important. You take care of that first, and everything else flows from that. And then you have others who are like,
Someone
hey,
else from the dark side, huh?
yeah, exactly. And then you have somebody else that's like, hey, I'm really, really good at growing fire, and we'll worry about the books later. And that's when you run into the major disasters. And that's where you have to do a lot of cleanup. But cleanup it's a pretty standardized procedure. You determine where the problem areas are. You work with the client to figure out what they need, the quickest, and you kind of work through it that way. And you kind of give them an idea. It's like, oh, you've got a major mess. You're looking at 6 months worth of cleanup. You've got a minor mess. You're looking at 90 days worth of cleanup. That kind of thing. But that's all pretty standard procedure. That's just something we're used to in accounting when we're dealing with an existing business. Is that when we come on board, there's going to be some level of cleanup. Uh, what I really try to strongly caution businesses against is things that, and I see this all the time, as we have new trends develop in the industry, there's this sort of overwhelming need of like, oh, we need to try that too. And in the process of doing that, you get away from what your brand is and what your core competency, what you're really good at. You start drifting away from that, and I call that shiny object syndrome. It's not my term; it's a pretty
Oh
standard
yeah,
term.
right.
And the idea is
Just
that
being distracted by the all the hotness,
ex-
the next innovation or the most trendy product or cultivar, but reacting to that can sometimes put you behind the ball instead because you're reacting to something that's already out there, right? By the time you have it ready, chances are things could have moved on or that light could have changed, so that you find yourself up a creek maybe in a worse point than you were before.
bingo. I think you've hit the nail right on the head there. And so what I try to
It's a
tell
very common problem in software.
Yeah, it sure is. Definitely. Like, what new bells and whistles can we put in there? And by the time you get around to developing those bells and whistles have changed. I see the exact same thing in cannabis. So, and in software, it's if you've got a good idea, it's easier to go out and find somebody to back you with capital and possibly even go down those rabbit holes with you until a certain point where they go, well, you're not coming up with anything that, you're it's taking too long, we're going to pull the plug. Whereas in cannabis, it's hard to find investors. So what I try to remind owners is that you have a limited amount of capital resources available to you. So you need to pick, I know you've got 18 lanes and they all seem great, but you need to pick like 2 or 3 lanes that you need to be in for now. See how those other lanes, how they develop over time, and then based on around what you're successful at, pick the right lanes. But don't jump into them all at once because, like you said, I think you said it perfectly well. You're going to end up further behind than when you started, and that's a terrible place to be.
Right. I can imagine it can be difficult to talk these business owners down off of their stage, their celebration and their mission, when they're trying to accomplish those 18 lanes or that 100 SKU product line versus maybe focus on the flower that helped them establish the business first or on, whatever values they have there. That's a unique part of business consulting. Does that roll into the services of an accountant often, actually outside of the cannabis industry, to provide business insight and kind of odds and ends, wisdom from their experience?
It does. It really is. The role of the CFO is to keep people in their lanes and to define what the business processes are for the various things that you're going to do, who's going to do what, and how's that going to be accounted for. So it definitely all rolls into that if you want to do things the right way. And I learned that, I learned a lot about cost accounting working for the Sierra Nevada Brewing Company. And one of the things that I noticed is that they never steered away from their core competencies. Their core competency is making pale ale. It's everywhere. They make lots of other different kinds of beer, but they're never going to sacrifice the time and effort that's going to do anything to hurt that flagship product. And the light bulb went on there. It's like everything you should be doing should be done to support that flagship product, whatever it is. Any new innovations should be a support of that flagship product.
Yeah, the Pareto principle in action right there, right? If
Yep.
20% of the product line is 20% of the product line is probably making 80% of the revenue. Finding what that focus is, which is often that initial ambition or whatever that seed was that started the business or the plan. On I also saw recently that you announced that you were starting as CFO for, this is another business I'm probably going to murder the pronunciation of, and it's Tamil Pies Holding Company,
That is correct.
THC.
Yes, absolutely. I'm really proud of the work that we're doing there. We're still in the pre-revenue stages. We're going to be soliciting for friends and family funding here in the next few weeks. It's one of the best leadership teams I've ever worked with in any industry. That I was able to introduce some of the people to the team, but also that all of these people coalesce together uh, out of this passion for the plant, and is specifically about thinking about innovative packaging, and also thinking about I'm limited in terms of what I can say at this particular point in time, so I'm
A lot of things in the works, huh?
yeah, a
That's
lot of
awesome.
things in the works. I think it's going to be a disruptor, but the thing that I think is most important, and I spoke in front of the Trinity County Agriculture Alliance last night with Holly Carter from Oxalis, California, which is one of the big compliance regulation, help you stay in compliance company. And she said something that really meant something to me, and this is what working at THC is all about, is that even in California, growing indoors is the rule, not the exception, and that doing sun grown craft cannabis, it's a unique minority. But it's the only world that I've ever known in this business, and so working for THC is a support of that portion of the industry, which is really really important to me. And it's probably not important to a lot of people, but there is going to be a small group of people like, oh, sun grown craft cannabis. That's a unique thing.
Yes, that outdoor quality, that craftsmanship behind those cultivars and behind the products that a micro business or a small outdoor grow can create is unparalleled. I've tried many different strains and cultivars from legal industries and from not so legal industries and supply chains. And I think that from anecdotal experience, that outdoor always has a very nice flavor to it. And when I can find sun grown, when I'm in the California markets and things like that, it's always a preference. There was a study recently on the THC and the terpene percentage, showing how outdoor cannabis actually has a higher terpene content than its indoor brethren. And they grew basically two rounds of the same cultivars and compared the test results. That being said, the the indoor grow was higher in THCA, but they also found that type of THCA was more likely to induce anxiety than the THCA that was from outdoor grows as well. So there's some science even backing the anecdotal evidence there, but I'd love to see that the ability for the industry to embrace those small and craft growers more and to not end up shoving them out with tax laws and different margin issues and things like that, because you can't really do that type of cultivation on full like cannabis industry scale without sacrificing, you're sacrificing something at scale.
You
And it's
are.
just similar to microbreweries and the Coors Brewery in Colorado. It's just they're different beasts and kind of solving different problems.
They are. I think you see the industry very well as far as that. Your perspective is very right on as far as that goes. And I because I take that, because it's the culture I come from. I take the smaller farmer very seriously. There are a lot of my colleagues who won't work with farmers like that simply because they're too small. But I always figure out some way to help them to ensure that their small businesses stay profitable, even if it's only like a couple hours a month, or I only see them once a quarter or something like that. I always try to figure out a way to help them as well, because they're small potatoes to me, but I know that the work that I provide for them is like the difference between them, you know, succeeding or failing. And so it's really important to me because I would like to see those people stay in the market.
Yes, definitely. And I've recently had that experience even as, setting up some of the business side of things for my projects. I've run into questions where I just can't personally solve the problem. It doesn't matter how much I Google or try to research on my own. I don't have the background to answer the financial question or the business question that I have. And, having resources or finding assistance like that has been invaluable to get over a few real obstacles, I think. So that's a noble pursuit for you and in providing your services that way to the industry. Well, with that, man, I just want to thank you again for joining me today and for sharing your accounting knowledge and telling us about the origins of Aldertine Group. Where can our listeners find more about you and reach out or connect with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. You can just look me up on there. Just Google in Sean Yoder, or you can go to Aldertine Group, ALDERTINE Group.com, and you can go to my website and find out more about what I do there. And that I'm definitely very active in the community, so you'll probably hear my opinion somewhere. Whether you agree with them or not is a whole different thing.
Hey, man, thank you again for sharing your insight. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Absolutely, Rob. It's been a real pleasure being here. What a great interview. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Apartment 113 podcast. For more information about the show and our range of services, visit apt113.com. We offer cannabis operations consulting, agile product management, and connoisseurship services. With over a decade of experience in the cannabis industry, Apartment 113 is here to help.